To understand the origins of World War II, we must first look to its predecessor, the Great War. Concluding in November 1918, World War I left an indelible mark on the global psyche, fundamentally reshaping political landscapes and international relations. Historians widely acknowledge that the peace settlement, intended to prevent future conflicts, paradoxically laid many of the groundwork for the next one. The devastation was immense, with millions dead and entire nations scarred. What emerged was not a lasting peace, but a fragile armistice, ripe for exploitation and further contention, as numerous scholars like A.J.P. Taylor have observed. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, officially ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers. However, its terms were exceptionally punitive towards Germany, who was held solely responsible for the conflict. Key stipulations, as documented in historical archives, included massive territorial losses, severe military restrictions, and substantial reparations payments. Contemporary German politicians, according to documents from the Weimar Republic, decried it as a diktat, a dictated peace. These provisions, while aimed at weakening Germany, also fostered deep resentment and a sense of national humiliation among its populace, a sentiment frequently cited by historians such as Margaret Macmillan. The economic consequences of Versailles, coupled with the global depression that struck in 1929, crippled Germany. Hyperinflation in the early 1920s rendered the German mark virtually worthless, destroying the savings of the middle class and exacerbating social unrest. Though a brief period of recovery occurred mid-decade, the Wall Street crash plunged the nation, and indeed much of the world, into a severe economic crisis. Unemployment soared, and industrial output plummeted. According to economic historians like Adam Tooze, this climate of despair and destitution created fertile ground for extremist ideologies, as people sought radical solutions to their seemingly insurmountable problems. The economic hardship directly fueled political instability. Beyond Germany, the interwar period witnessed the ascendance of totalitarian regimes across Europe. In Italy, Benito Mussolini capitalized on post-World War I disillusionment and economic instability to consolidate power. By 1922, his fascist party, characterized by fervent nationalism, authoritarian rule, and suppression of political opposition, had seized control. Mussolini's model, often summarized by the slogan "everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state," offered a blueprint for centralized control and national revival. Historical accounts, such as those by Dennis Max Smith, indicate that this strongman image and promise of order appealed to a populace weary of democratic inefficiency and social unrest, providing an early example of aggressive expansionism with his invasion of Ethiopia. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP, mirrored Italy's trajectory but with far more devastating implications. Born from the ashes of World War I and the despair of economic collapse, Hitler's party offered a potent cocktail of extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, and promises to restore German pride and power. Initially a fringe movement, the NSDAP skillfully exploited public discontent, gaining traction through fervent rallies and propaganda. Historical records show that Hitler's mesmerizing oratory played a crucial role, allowing him to articulate a vision that resonated with millions of disenfranchised Germans. His rise was a slow burn, fueled by successive crises and a calculated targeting of public frustrations. The Weimar Republic, Germany's democratic government established after World War I, proved inherently fragile. Beset by political extremism from both the left and right, economic crises, and a lingering lack of popular support, it struggled to maintain stability. The Treaty of Versailles itself, viewed by many Germans as a betrayal, delegitimized the Republic from its inception. Records from the era frequently highlight numerous attempted coups and widespread political assassinations. According to historian Richard Evans, the Weimar era was a republic without republicans, indicating that a significant portion of the populace, particularly the traditional elites, never truly embraced democratic ideals, preferring authoritarian alternatives. This systemic weakness would prove fatal. Upon becoming chancellor in January 1933, Adolf Hitler wasted no time dismantling democratic institutions and implementing his radical ideology. Central to his vision, articulated in his book Mein Kampf, was the concept of Lebensraum, or living space. This ideology posited that Germany needed to expand eastward into Eastern Europe, primarily at the expense of Slavic peoples, to secure agricultural land and resources for the supposed Aryan race. Historians like Timothy Snyder have extensively documented how this ambition was inextricably linked to racial supremacy and a brutal plan for conquest and ethnic cleansing. It was not merely about reclaiming lost territories, but forging a vast new German empire, fundamentally altering the map of Europe and unleashing unprecedented violence. Hitler's first significant gamble against the Treaty of Versailles came in March 1936 with the remilitarization of the Rhineland. This industrial region, bordering France and Belgium, had been designated a demilitarized zone under the treaty, intended as a buffer. Despite Germany's military weakness at the time, Hitler, against the advice of his generals, ordered troops to re-enter the area. Contemporary British and French records, as explored by historians like Ian Kershaw, confirm that both nations were acutely aware of the violation but chose not to act forcefully. This cautious response, primarily due to economic constraints and a desire to avoid another war, emboldened Hitler and signaled a critical failure of collective security, testing the limits of international tolerance. The international community's muted reaction to the Rhineland occupation marked the effective beginning of the policy of appeasement. Led primarily by Britain and, to a lesser extent, France, appeasement was predicated on the belief that by granting Hitler certain concessions, his expansionist ambitions could be satisfied, thereby preserving peace in Europe. This approach was rooted in a genuine desire to avoid the horrors of another major war, as well as a misreading of Hitler's ultimate intentions. Diplomatic cables and government memos from the period, analyzed by historians like Sidney Astor, show a persistent hope that Germany could be brought back into the family of nations through negotiation rather than confrontation. This strategy, however, would only embolden the aggressor. From 1936 to 1939, Spain was gripped by a brutal civil war, a conflict that transcended national borders and became a proxy battleground for ideological clashes. Francisco Franco's nationalist forces, supported by Fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, fought against the Republican government, which received aid from the Soviet Union and international brigades. For Germany and Italy, the war offered a critical opportunity to test new military technologies and tactics, including aerial bombardment and armored warfare. Contemporary military reports confirmed the deployment of Germany's Condor Legion and Italian air units. Historians, such as Paul Preston, highlight how this war provided invaluable combat experience for German and Italian forces, refining the very blitzkrieg methods that would soon be unleashed across Europe. Hitler's next move came in March 1938 with the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria. This act of unification, expressly forbidden by the Treaty of Versailles, had long been a goal of German nationalists. Despite initial Austrian government resistance, Hitler orchestrated a rapid military invasion, which was met with widespread public approval among many Austrians who shared ethnic and cultural ties with Germany. Photographs and newsreel footage from the time depict jubilant crowds welcoming German troops into Vienna. Historians like Ian Kershaw argue that the lack of significant international condemnation, particularly from Britain and France, further solidified Hitler's belief that Western powers were unwilling to forcefully challenge his aggressive foreign policy, thereby removing another barrier to his expansionist aims. Following Austria, Hitler set his sights on the Sudetenland, a region of Czechoslovakia with a significant German-speaking population. Hitler claimed that these ethnic Germans faced persecution and demanded their integration into the Reich. Czechoslovakia, a democratic nation with a strong military and alliances with France and the Soviet Union, was prepared to defend its borders. Diplomatic records show a period of intense tension, with the threat of war looming large. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, determined to prevent conflict, initiated frantic negotiations. The Sudetenland became the flashpoint for Europe's next major crisis, demonstrating Hitler's increasingly brazen territorial demands and the international community's struggle to contain them, as documented by historians. The crisis culminated in the Munich Agreement of September 1938. In a desperate bid for peace, representatives from Germany, Italy, Britain, and France met, conspicuously excluding Czechoslovakia. Under immense pressure, the Allied powers agreed to allow Germany to annex the Sudetenland. This decision, as reflected in contemporary reports, was hailed by many as a triumph for peace, epitomizing the policy of appeasement. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously declared "peace for our time" upon his return. However, critics like Winston Churchill immediately condemned the agreement as a shameful betrayal that merely emboldened Hitler. Historical consensus now largely views Munich as a catastrophic miscalculation that signaled to Hitler that Western powers would not stand in his way. Neville Chamberlain's declaration of peace for our time encapsulated the prevailing hope that the Munich Agreement had averted war. Public reaction in Britain and France, as evidenced by newsreels and newspaper accounts, was largely one of relief. After the horrors of the First World War, few desired a repeat. Yet, beneath the surface of relief, dissenting voices emerged. Winston Churchill, a prominent critic, famously stated in Parliament that Britain and France had to choose between war and dishonor. They chose dishonor. They will have war. His foresight proved grimly accurate. Historians generally agree that while Chamberlain's intentions were noble, his actions were based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Hitler's insatiable territorial ambitions and his willingness to break any promise for power. Hitler's true intentions became undeniable just 6 months after Munich. In March 1939, German troops marched into the remainder of Czechoslovakia, effectively dismembering the nation and establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. This act exposed the utter hollowness of the Munich Agreement and shattered any lingering illusions about Hitler's commitment to peace. Unlike the Sudetenland, there was no pretext of protecting ethnic Germans. This was outright conquest. Contemporary diplomatic communications, now declassified, reveal the profound shock and anger among British and French officials. Historians like Zara Steiner emphasize that this invasion was the definitive turning point, forcing Western leaders to finally concede that appeasement had failed and that Hitler could not be trusted. The invasion of Czechoslovakia marked the unequivocal failure of appeasement. British and French leaders, finally abandoning their hopes for a diplomatic resolution, began to prepare for war. In a significant policy shift, Britain issued a guarantee to Poland, declaring that any German aggression against Poland would trigger a full military response. Similar pledges were made to Romania and Greece. This move, documented in parliamentary records, demonstrated a clear commitment to collective security. Historians generally agree that this period witnessed a fundamental re-evaluation of foreign policy, as the illusion of peace through concession evaporated. The world watched as Europe braced itself for an inevitable conflict, with the question no longer being if, but when, war would erupt. With Czechoslovakia absorbed, Hitler turned his attention to Poland. His primary demands focused on two key areas: the return of the Free City of Danzig, a predominantly German city under League of Nations administration, and access through the Polish Corridor. The corridor was a strip of land separating East Prussia from the rest of Germany, granting Poland access to the Baltic Sea. Hitler viewed these territories, granted to Poland by the Treaty of Versailles, as an affront to German sovereignty. Polish leaders, however, refused to concede. Archival documents reveal that they feared any concession would simply be a prelude to further demands, much like the Sudetenland. Poland stood firm, backed by Britain and France's recent pledges, creating a direct confrontation. In a move that stunned the world, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty, in August 1939. This agreement, coming from two ideologically opposed regimes, was a cynical stroke of realpolitik. Beyond its public declaration of peace, a secret protocol, later confirmed by declassified Soviet archives, outlined a division of Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence, specifically targeting Poland. Historians like Richard Overy emphasized that this pact removed Hitler's fear of a two-front war, paving the way for his invasion of Poland. For the Soviets, it bought time to rearm. For the West, it was a profound shock, undermining any remaining hopes of a broad anti-Hitler alliance and signaling the imminent outbreak of war. The stage was set. On September 1, 1939,
Without a formal declaration of war, Germany launched a massive invasion of Poland. German forces, employing their new doctrine of blitzkrieg or lightning war, struck with overwhelming speed and force. Armored divisions, supported by close air support from the Luftwaffe, rapidly broke through Polish defenses. Newsreel footage from the time shows German tanks and infantry sweeping across the border. This unprovoked aggression, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed, confirmed Hitler's disregard for international law and his commitment to military conquest. Historians widely agree that this invasion marks the unequivocal beginning of World War II, a war that would engulf the globe. Britain and France immediately issued ultimatums to Germany, demanding the withdrawal of troops from Poland. When these demands were ignored, both nations declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's somber radio address to the nation conveyed the gravity of the moment, as archived recordings demonstrate. His words confirmed that despite all efforts to maintain peace, war had arrived. This declaration marked the end of the policy of appeasement and the beginning of a conflict that would quickly escalate beyond anything previously imagined. While their guarantee to Poland was honored, the immediate military assistance they could provide was limited, leaving Poland to face the overwhelming German assault alone. The German invasion of Poland showcased the devastating effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg doctrine. This revolutionary military strategy, literally meaning lightning war, involved highly mobile armored units, panzer divisions, supported by concentrated air power, rapidly punching through enemy lines. Rather than engage in attritional trench warfare like World War I, Blitzkrieg aimed to bypass strongpoints, encircle enemy forces, and disrupt command and control. Military analysts of the era, whose reports are now declassified, marveled at its speed and coordination. It was a stark departure from conventional warfare, rendering static defenses obsolete and demonstrating a new, terrifyingly efficient way to wage war. Poland simply had no effective counter to this overwhelming, coordinated assault. Despite determined resistance and considerable bravery, the Polish armed forces were rapidly overwhelmed by the German blitzkrieg. Their military, largely equipped with World War I-era technology and tactics, was no match for the speed and coordination of German panzer divisions and the Luftwaffe. Records indicate that Polish cavalry famously, though largely ineffectively, confronted German tanks, a symbol of the vast technological disparity. Within weeks, major Polish cities, including Warsaw, were besieged and fell. The country's fate was sealed not only by German might but also by the unexpected Soviet invasion from the east, which commenced just over 2 weeks into the German campaign. Poland's valiant defense crumbled under the dual assault, illustrating the brutal efficiency of modern warfare. As German forces advanced from the west, the Soviet Union, adhering to the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, launched its own invasion of eastern Poland on September 17, 1939. This two-pronged assault sealed Poland's fate. The Polish government, unable to fight on two fronts, ordered its forces not to resist the Soviets, hoping to preserve some military strength for a future fight. However, the Red Army rapidly occupied the agreed-upon Soviet sphere of influence. This act, documented in Soviet military records, further solidified the partition of Poland and demonstrated the cynical pragmatism of the Nazi-Soviet alliance. The dual invasion marked the complete subjugation of Poland and the eradication of its sovereignty, transforming the conflict into a broader geopolitical struggle. Following the rapid conquest of Poland, a strange calm descended upon Western Europe. From late 1939 to early 1940, Britain and France, though officially at war with Germany, saw little direct combat. This period became known as the Phony War or Sitzkrieg, sitting war. While naval engagements occurred and Allied forces fortified their defenses along the Maginot Line, no major land offensives were launched. Contemporary newspapers expressed public bewilderment at the lack of action. Historians suggest several reasons for this lull. The Allies were still mobilizing and rearming, hoping a blockade would weaken Germany, and hesitant to initiate a repeat of WW2's bloody trench warfare. This period of inaction, however, allowed Germany to consolidate its gains and prepare for its next offensive, much to the frustration of more aggressive strategists. While Western Europe experienced the Phony War,
a brutal conflict erupted in the north.
In November 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland, initiating the Winter War.
The Soviets, seeking territorial concessions for border security, severely underestimated Finnish resistance. Despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, the Finns, utilizing their knowledge of the harsh terrain and innovative guerrilla tactics, inflicted heavy casualties on the Red Army.
Though ultimately forced to cede territory in March 1940, Finland's staunch defense captured international admiration.
Military analysts, whose reports were later studied by Allied and Axis powers, observed significant weaknesses in the Red Army's command structure and training, influencing Hitler's later calculations regarding the Soviet Union's military capabilities.
The phony war ended abruptly in April 1940, when Germany launched invasions of Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrendered almost immediately.
Norway, however, mounted a more determined resistance with Allied support, though it ultimately fell to the Germans. The strategic objectives of these invasions, as outlined in German military plans, were clear: to secure iron ore supplies from Sweden, which passed through Norway, and to establish naval and air bases to project power into the Atlantic. These bases would prove crucial for Germany's U-boat campaign and its planned invasion of Britain. This aggressive move demonstrated Germany's capacity to launch simultaneous, complex operations and its determination to control vital resources, further expanding the war beyond Poland's borders. The failure to effectively counter the German invasion of Norway led to a political crisis in Britain.
Public and parliamentary dissatisfaction with Neville Chamberlain's leadership reached a critical point. On May 10, 1940, the same day Germany launched its invasion of France, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister.
Churchill, a long-standing critic of appeasement, brought a new, resolute resolve to the British war effort.
His powerful speeches and unwavering determination would become a beacon of hope during Britain's darkest hour.
Historians generally agree that Churchill's ascension marked a fundamental shift in Britain's wartime leadership, signaling a firm commitment to resist Germany at all costs, regardless of the mounting challenges. On May 10, 1940, Germany launched its major offensive against France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. This campaign, known as the Battle of France, quickly brought the full force of the Blitzkrieg to Western Europe. German forces bypassed the heavily fortified Maginot Line by invading through the neutral Low Countries. The sheer speed and coordination of the German attack, as documented in military operational reports, caught Allied commanders completely off guard. The plan, often referred to as Sichelschnitt or sickle cut, aimed to drive through the Ardennes forest, a region thought impassable for tanks, to encircle Allied forces. This aggressive strategy marked a pivotal moment, threatening the collapse of the Western Front. The Maginot Line, France's formidable defensive system built after World War I, was designed to deter a frontal assault from Germany. Comprising a series of interconnected forts, bunkers, and anti-tank defenses, it was considered impenetrable. However, the German strategy circumvented it entirely. Instead of attacking the line directly, Hitler's forces poured through the lightly defended Ardennes forest and the Low Countries. This strategic brilliance, or perhaps Allied miscalculation, rendered the Maginot Line effectively useless. Contemporary military assessments, later reviewed by historians, confirmed that French High Command had considered the Ardennes too rough for a major armored thrust, a fatal error in judgment that doomed their defensive strategy and exposed their unpreparedness for blitzkrieg. The breakthrough in the Ardennes forest was the crucial element of the German plan. French and British commanders had largely dismissed the possibility of a large-scale armored thrust through this dense, hilly, and wooded region. They believed it would slow down German forces, making them vulnerable. However, German General Erich von Manstein's audacious plan, executed by General Heinz Guderian's panzer divisions, proved them wrong. German tanks and motorized infantry, moving rapidly and with minimal resistance, crossed the Meuse River and advanced towards the English Channel, severing Allied communications and trapping vast numbers of British and French forces in Belgium. This unexpected maneuver, according to military historian Robert Citino, was a masterstroke of operational art, a turning point in the battle for France. With Allied forces trapped against the English Channel and Dunkirk, their annihilation seemed imminent. Hitler's halt order on May 24, for reasons still debated by historians, gave the Allies a precious reprieve. Britain launched Operation Dynamo, a massive evacuation effort involving not only naval vessels but also hundreds of civilian boats. Over 9 days, from May 26 to June 4, 1940, against all odds, approximately 338,000 British, French, and Belgian soldiers were rescued from the beaches of Dunkirk. Newsreel footage and eyewitness accounts emphasized the chaos and heroism of the evacuation. Though a strategic defeat, Dunkirk was a vital psychological victory, saving the core of the British Expeditionary Force and allowing Britain to continue the war, as described by historians like Walter Lord. With the British Expeditionary Force evacuated and France's armies shattered, the path to Paris was open. On June 14, 1940, German troops marched into an undefended Paris, effectively signifying the fall of France. The city, declared an open city disparate from destruction, witnessed the surreal sight of German soldiers parading down its iconic avenues. Photographs and news reports from the time capture the somber mood of the French population, interspersed with scenes of German triumph. The fall of Paris was a profound symbolic blow, signaling the collapse of one of Europe's major powers and the speed and totality of Germany's military victory. It left Britain standing alone against the might of Nazi Germany, facing an unprecedented challenge. On June 22, 1940, in the same railway carriage where Germany had signed the armistice ending World War I, France signed an armistice with Germany. France was divided, the northern and western regions, including Paris, came under direct German occupation, while a nominally independent Vichy France was established in the south, led by Marshal Philippe Pétain. This new regime, headquartered in Vichy, was authoritarian and collaborated extensively with Nazi Germany. Historical documents and judicial records from the post-war era attest to the complex and often controversial role of Vichy France, highlighting its active participation in the Holocaust and other Nazi policies. The armistice marked a complete capitulation and a deep national humiliation for France, profoundly altering its identity and trajectory for years. By the summer of 1940, Britain stood as the last major Allied power confronting Nazi Germany. France had fallen, and the continent was largely under Axis control. The prospect of a German invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, loomed large. Churchill's defiant speeches galvanized the nation, promising to fight on the beaches, "We shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender." This period, often called Britain's finest hour, saw immense resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. Historians like Max Hastings point out that while military might was crucial, the sheer determination of the British people played a critical role in resisting the seemingly unstoppable German war machine. Before any cross-channel invasion could be attempted, Germany needed to achieve air superiority over the English Channel and southern England. This objective precipitated the Battle of Britain, the first major campaign fought entirely by air forces. The German Luftwaffe, under Hermann Göring, began to target Royal Air Force, RAF, airfields, radar stations, and aircraft factories. The RAF, though outnumbered, possessed superior radar technology, the advantage of fighting over home territory, and highly skilled pilots. Intelligence reports from both sides, now extensively analyzed, reveal the strategic importance of air superiority in the fierce aerial combat that was about to unfold. This battle would determine whether Britain could resist invasion and continue the fight, shaping the entire trajectory of the war. While the focus remained on Europe, the war also expanded into North Africa. Italy, under Mussolini, aimed to establish a new Roman Empire, launching an invasion of British-controlled Egypt from its colony of Libya in September 1940. This initiated the North African Campaign, a theater that would see significant engagements between Axis and Allied forces. British and Commonwealth troops, though initially outnumbered, successfully pushed back the Italians. Documents from the Italian High Command reveal their overconfidence and logistical deficiencies. This extension of the conflict into Africa broadened the geographical scope of World War II and diverted crucial resources, demonstrating that the global nature of the war was beginning to take shape far beyond the battlefields of Western Europe. As Britain braced for invasion and fighting simmered in North Africa, Hitler's long-term ambitions for Lebensraum in the East remained undimmed. Despite the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, preparations for an invasion of the Soviet Union, codenamed Operation Barbarossa, were already underway. German military planners began meticulously mapping out the invasion, a move that would open the largest and most brutal front of the entire war. Though its full scope would not be realized until 1941, the very existence of such plans, later revealed in captured German documents, demonstrates Hitler's relentless pursuit of ideological and territorial expansion. The groundwork was being laid for a conflict of unprecedented scale and savagery, a conflict that would fundamentally reshape the global power balance. Beyond Europe, another major power was pursuing an aggressive expansionist agenda: Imperial Japan. Driven by a desire for resources and regional dominance, Japan had been engaged in a brutal war with China since 1937. Its growing influence in East Asia and the Pacific brought it into increasing conflict with Western powers, particularly the United States. While not yet directly linked to the European conflict, Japan's actions were part of a wider global shift towards militarism and expansionism. Contemporary diplomatic reports from the US and Britain, now public, show growing concern over Japanese aggression. Historians widely agree that Japan's actions in Asia were integral to the global context of World War II, setting the stage for future confrontations that would fully globalize the conflict. By the end of 1940, the world was irrevocably divided. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, were aggressively pursuing their imperial ambitions, having achieved significant territorial gains. The Allied powers, primarily Britain and its Commonwealth, stood defiantly against them, battered but unbowed. The United States, though officially neutral, was increasingly leaning towards intervention, providing aid to Britain through programs like Lend-Lease. Diplomatic correspondence from the period indicates the growing realization that the conflict was rapidly expanding beyond a European war. The initial phase of World War II, characterized by rapid German expansion and the collapse of traditional European powers, had set the stage for a prolonged, global struggle that would reshape the geopolitical order entirely. The outbreak of total war spurred unprecedented levels of economic mobilization and technological innovation across all major powers. Factories shifted from producing consumer goods to armaments, aircraft, and tanks. Scientific research, particularly in fields like radar, rocketry, and code-breaking, received massive investment. German U-boat tactics, for instance, forced the Allies to rapidly develop convoy systems and anti-submarine warfare technologies. Historical economic data consistently demonstrates a massive reallocation of national resources. This intense push for innovation, while driven by destructive ends, fundamentally altered industrial capabilities and scientific advancement, laying the groundwork for post-war technological revolutions, as historians of science and technology have observed. In an era of total war, maintaining public morale and national unity became paramount. All combatant nations heavily relied on propaganda to shape public opinion, demonize the enemy, and justify their actions. Iconic posters, radio broadcasts, and newsreels became pervasive tools. For the Allies, messages emphasized resistance, freedom, and the fight against tyranny. For the Axis, propaganda focused on national pride, racial purity, and the promise of a new order. Archived propaganda materials reveal the psychological warfare waged alongside conventional combat. This deliberate manipulation of information was crucial in sustaining the war effort, motivating populations to endure hardship, and ensuring continued support for the immense sacrifices required, as scholars of media and wartime communication note. As 1940 drew to a close, the world found itself at a precipice. The initial phase of World War II, marked by Germany's swift and brutal conquests across Europe, had concluded. The map of Europe was redrawn, and the balance of power fundamentally shifted. Britain stood isolated but defiant, preparing for the looming aerial assault and potential invasion. Meanwhile, the gears of war were turning towards new fronts and even greater devastation, particularly in the east and across the vast expanses of the Pacific. The lessons from the failure of appeasement, the efficacy of blitzkrieg, and the sheer scale of modern conflict had been learned at a terrible cost. The global struggle was only just beginning, promising years of unimaginable bloodshed and profound transformation.